You assume.
Before I just tell you about it, I'm just going to show you. Check this out.
You assume in America, if you happen to maybe split time in Orlando and Michigan, that if you go to Michigan over the summer, people aren't going to be able to just move into your house and then claim squatters' rights on your private residence. And yet, in places like New York and California, that's exactly what's happening in this country. Homes are being invaded, and those states and their laws are not siding with the homeowners, they're siding with the squatters. In fact, from the property, these are people that never had a right to be in the property, find squatters living there. She changed the locks to get them out, and the state of New York arrested her instead of the squatters. Just a few murdered the property owner when she confronted them for being in her apartment illegally. In fact, we even have illegal aliens taking to social media, instructing other foreigners how to come into this country and commandeer property. They have gotten involved in this. Well, today in the state of Florida, passing muster here. You are not going to be able to commandeer somebody's private property and expect to get away with it. What you can do now, if you're the victim of squatting, you can simply fill out a form, give it to your local sheriff, and the sheriff is instructed to go and remove the people who are inhabiting your dwelling illegally. And that will happen very quickly. And I can guarantee you, it's just like you saw, I think it was a couple months ago, there was a discussion about some of these theft rings that happen, a lot of them with illegal aliens, and how people will steal in New York. Sometimes they'll try to come to Florida to spend the money, but they don't steal in Florida. And the question was, well, why don't you steal in Florida? And they said, because you go to jail in Florida when you do that. Yes, you're going to have really strong remedies so that if it does happen to you, they're going to be ejected. But the fact that you have those remedies for you very quickly, people are not going to want to even try this in the state of Florida. So I commend the legislature for this action. I think it's going to be something that is going to be very, very meaningful for this state. And look, you see these trends that happen in these other parts of the country. I think good leadership is looking and saying, okay, we're not going to repeat what is going on in these failed jurisdictions. And so the legislature was up to the task, and then here today we're signing this into law is going to show that the state of Florida is up to the task. So I thank the legislature for what they've done. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in private property rights. We think it's good that people can aspire to own a home. So the squatter scam ends today. With my signature on this piece of legislation, and the state of Florida will be better for it.
To knock on the door and be met with squatters. You know, squatters actually is a very, very kind term. These are criminals and con artists that need to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. That is no more with the governor's signature on this document. Sheriffs from across the state will be able to provide the adequate resources and support for victims of these crimes and homeowners to preserve their property. And I'm incredibly grateful on behalf of all of our legislators and the governor to make this a possibility and give us, public safety professionals, another tool to use to protect our citizens of the great state of Florida. Thank you so much.
All right, so here we go.
All right, there it is. That's my recap. I was just going to end it, but I might as well just share some other stuff. That was like a 30-minute long, like there was a lot of other irrelevant stuff. But anyways, I'll provide the link below just in case anybody else wants to see that. But this was perfect timing because I recently found a video like teaching people how to be a squatter. And I was like, you know what? This is perfect timing. Florida just figured out how to beat the squatters, and let me just put this out here and squash this next video. You'll see.
Squatters take over a Pueblo woman's home and they just refuse to leave.
Well, Trisha and Steve, neighbors here have no idea what else to do. They already come and kicked them out, but they say the next day they were back again.
Police are called to a multi-million-dollar Hollywood Hills estate after neighbors hear screams coming from inside the lavish home, fearing someone inside was being hurt. But what they found instead was a group of squatters who had been illegally living inside the home that has been abandoned and now trashed.
This woman is trying to get into the house, but her access is being blocked, and it's her own home.
Renting is expensive. Buying a house? No one can afford that. But what if I told you there was a way that you could live in the mansion of your dreams for free? Well, I'd like to introduce you to squatters' rights. See, when you think of squatting, you typically think of homeless people camping out in some disgusting abandoned building. But in reality, anyone can be a squatter, including you, and it doesn't have to be in a disgusting building. All you have to do is find a beautiful mansion that no one is living in, and there are a lot of mansions like this by the way. Then you just gotta break in somehow, make it your own, and if no one bats and can't legally kick you out, and neither can the cops. Thanks to squatters' rights, the owner of the mansion now has to legally treat you as an unpaid tenant. And as for the eviction process, it could take months, sometimes even years. Under the guise of empathy, squatting can pretty much grant you a free month stay or longer to states like California or Oregon. And who knows, if you play the system right, you might even become the proud owner of the home.
What happens if you don't kick them off? So Emma Colton wrote this for Fox News. Squatter who won battle over dead woman's home sells it for there long enough. He met all the requirements of the law to where he became the titled owner. And then he sold the house for a huge profit.
Take this beautiful home in Beverly Hills for example, 1316 Beverly Grove Place. It sits right next to mansions owned by Jeff Bezos and LeBron James. They throw wild parties and raves, they have orgies that last until 10 a.m., and neighbors find condoms and drugs littered across the streets every day. But here's the interesting thing, is that the people throwing these parties, the people living in this home are squatters.
These squatters have been throwing really crazy parties there since October. They got lots of nice cars that come up and they just block the roads. They trash the neighborhood. There's tons of, since October, there's been reports of like numerous fires, assaults, arrests, drugs, and there's nothing that can really be done about it for many, many reasons.
They don't own the home, they're not paying rent, they can't get evicted, and they might even end up getting the mansion for free.
Yeah, so here's all the shit that gets left behind, like the whippets, cups, and then they found drugs at the back of this Porsche. So all they could do was tow the car that had them in it. They couldn't really do anything about the squatters when they found that. Here's a flyer. These are all the people that throw the thing. Music Cartel, Beulah, Game Over, Trippus, and all these people are visible on IG completely. They're not hiding. These are the tickets that you can buy. So 75. This right here is the actual like text telling them like parking is free from 6 p.m.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They just let them park all up on the street?
There's the front gate. That's LeBron's property that's being built 2 doors down.
Whoa.
This is crazy.
Yeah, so it's just
that's crazy.
It's a crazy thing that nobody can get them out.
This is Just Kidding News, by the way. A hilarious show that I had the pleasure of being a guest on recently. I've been watching Joe and Bart since I was a kid, and you should definitely subscribe to them. I'll link to their channel below. And it's all because they knew how to take advantage of the squatting laws in California. So who is behind the squatting? How were they able to pull it off? For educational purposes only, of course? Well, it all centers around the mastermind behind the squatting operation, a mysterious man that calls himself Mr. Gucci.
We caught up with one man at the front gate who says he is Mr.
American Dream. So let's learn how to own a home for free. Meet Mr. Gucci. He's pretty much the Great Gatsby of Beverly Hills. He's apparently rich, no one knows who he is, and he's throwing the biggest mansion parties in Beverly Hills. And him and his squatting crew have been having the time of their lives. They're even earning up to $30,000 renting out the rooms in the mansion and charging admission to the parties held there every week.
They found all the flyers for these parties that these people are throwing, and it'll show like online ticketing where you can actually buy tickets for like $75 to like go to these parties. Wow. And on Booking.com, you can even rent a bedroom for $300 a night.
Whoa.
This story is pretty long, so it's gonna have a whole like thing with that. But for $300 a night, you also get a 1-hour massage with that. Really weird. So there's basically
that's a good deal.
2 doors down, like I said, is LeBron's new property that's still in the process of being built.
Oh, okay.
Because of all these parties and shit that they've been having here, they've had to have like a 24-hour security detail standard to make sure that nothing happens
to his house.
To just that property line. So that guy just stands out there and just watches everything that's going on, and he says the streets full of like there's condoms everywhere, there's nitrous oxide cans from like all the whippets they're doing, there's a bunch of cups, pools of vomit, just like these parties are pretty crazy.
But how? How is this even possible? See, the technical term for squatting is adverse possession, and it's a legal way to gain any property in America, even a mansion, for free. Rules for taking possession vary by states, so do your homework before you go out looking for abandoned mansions. The process requires you to live on the property for a period of at least 2 years in places like Arizona, or up to 5 years in California, or as many as 30 years in Louisiana property tax. All you have to do is ignore the police, media, and realtors pestering you, because without a court order, they can't do a thing. Pretty sweet deal, right?
You're one of the squatters?
Are you one of the squatters in the house?
Absolutely not. I don't know anyone here. I don't know anything. Please leave me alone.
And I know 2 to 5 years sounds like a lot to pull off the scheme, like aren't they gonna kick you out somehow? But there is a loophole, at least in California. In California, if you're squatting and you change your driver's license to match the address of the place you're staying at, the police will have no choice but to let you stay. Since squatting is not a criminal offense, police can't kick you out. In fact, without a judgment, the owner can't even enter it. That is why homeowners in many progressive states are absolutely terrified of finding squatters in their homes. And that's exactly what the squatters at 1316 Beverly Grove Place did.
So when police tried to get them out, the squatters were actually able to produce driver's licenses that had the address on them. So that means there's a window when someone like squats in your property. If they're able to renew their license and get that license sent to the address and they can get it from the mail, then you've just missed the window to eviction.
Whoa! Wow.
So there's you have to catch them before they are able to do that.
That law is so fucking stupid.
So once it reaches there, the police can't do anything about it.
For their actual residents.
So then they have to actually go to court to prove that.
You can do that to any house.
Yeah, and then they even.
I'll check the mail, then I'll just register at DMV, whatever, and I just make sure I pull the mail out.
Yeah, exactly. So then there's also this fake lease agreement that they show that shows that they actually rented the space, but the property agent's like, that's not real. Like, we never made one of those.
And if you're persistent enough, the landlord might just give up and the property will be yours.
You know, we were handling it, but now it got a little tough. We don't want to deal with it. So again, if somebody moves in your house while you're gone and changes the locks, this is our city. We need change.
And here's the thing, squatting is not reserved for just America. In Spain, there's a squatting movement called off suburban properties, only to be arrested for trespassing. And probably one of the craziest cases, last year in London, a squatter took over someone's home, won it in court, and ended up selling it for $500,000. Talk about a payday. So if you're trying to be like one of these success stories, the owner finds out that you are on the property, they would need to get a court order to get you removed. Just think about that for a second. All you have to do is break into someone's house, change the locks, keep quiet, ignore the landlord, and voila! A mansion that normally rents out for $30,000 a month can be yours for free.
The neighbors have complained saying, hey, here's the breach. They're using the property for something that it's not allowed to be used for. Well, if they were the homeowner, then you can get them in trouble for that, but they're not. There's nothing you can do. Isn't that crazy?
Jake, you gotta get to the bottom of that.
But still, this is a pretty incredible feat that they pulled off. They chose the perfect mansion that they knew was abandoned, they knew to update their driver's license with the address, they proactively created a fake lease agreement, and they know exactly what to say to the cops when confronted. So who are these people? Well, this is where the story gets even crazier. Original owner of the mansion was a guy named Dr. Munir Uweda. He's a multi-millionaire doctor who was involved in the biggest insurance scam in Los Angeles history. While Uweda was practicing orthopedic surgery, he would rip off patients by performing unnecessary surgeries on them that left dozens of people permanently maimed. Like not being able to walk again kind of maimed. Uweda didn't even perform the surgeries himself. He would put patients under and let his physician's assistant perform the surgeries, who wasn't even trained for the stuff.
So let's say that you got hurt at work, right? Yeah. And then you have like a workman's comp program, whatever. That guy is gonna lie to you and say, oh, you need to get this procedure done. And he's gonna refer you to this doctor who doesn't even know what the hell he's gonna do with you. And they just make up some bullshit thing on your leg and now you're disabled. They knock you out, you wake up, that doctor never even touched you. Some other guy did. And now you're living with this botched surgery you never even needed. To the tune of $150 million in damages from people.
Uweda and his staff allegedly tricked. Once the patients were under general anesthesia, Peter Nelson would do the surgeries, without Uweda in the room, which is against the law. In a statement, prosecutors said those patients sustained lasting scars and many required additional surgeries and suffered physical and psychological trauma.
In 2015, Uweda was in the crosshairs of California prosecutors, and they were ready to send him to prison for life. They had this huge indictment cooked up and ready to serve, but when officials swung by to deliver it, Uweda was nowhere to be found. He had skipped town for Lebanon, because Lebanon does not have an extradition treaty with the US. On top of the insurance scam, this guy also happened to be linked to the murder of his ex-girlfriend, model Juliana Redding. He had hired a hitman to kill her when she was just 21, after her father, an Arizona pharmacist, pulled out of a business deal with them. She was a one-time Maxim cover girl and died 5 days after the deal fell through. To make matters worse, prosecutors believe Uweda killed Redding using his office manager Kelly Sue Park, who was described as a female James Bond.
Prosecutors say Ueda bragged about Park, calling her a female James Bond he could rely on to take care of business.
Although Park's DNA was found all over the crime scene, she was acquitted of all charges back in 2015. So with Ueda hiding in Lebanon, the court seized his mansion, and the property has been under the control of the criminal court ever since, making the state of California, quote, responsible for its upkeep, which includes a pool man and a gardener, end quotes. The court's goal was to sell the house to use the money to pay back the victims of the crime. And then somewhere in this mess, maybe someone connected to Dr. Ueda, or someone connected to the mortgage company behind the house, or some connection like that, someone saw that this house was seized by the courts, and they knew that if they broke in somehow, changed the locks, get the address on their licenses, and produce a fake lease agreement, there would be nothing anyone can do to kick them out. The listing agent for the home found out about the squatters after the pool guy called them about, quote, new tenants moving in, end quotes. Quote, I called the LAPD. When the cops came, the squatters produced a fake lease, and the police said it was a civil matter, end quotes. Right now, a guy in his mid-30s named Morgan Gargelo is one of the squatters at the mansion after being evicted from his last LA apartments. He's also serving a 3-year probation after beating his girlfriend. He says he only pays $25,000 a year for the place and paid it to an Italian-American guy who may or may not be our old friend about this mysterious Italian man. His answer was quite vague. Quote, no idea. The guys had the keys to everything. Morgan also admits that he lives there with his 3 friends, and utilities are included in the contract.
Squatters are claiming that the former owner allowed them to live there, but the true owner of the home is really uncertain. So here's what happened. There's a guy named Jeff Scapa. He's the private mortgage lender that loaned $3.8 million to a company called MDRCA Properties LLC, who bought the home. Like a company bought the home, right? MDRCA filed bankruptcy process. So they're thinking that maybe these are friends of the people who are being foreclosed on.
So this is like a long con.
They'll do like Shabbat parties and like things like that. And the other events that these same companies do, like the flyer will show who's throwing the party. Like it'll have like names of companies and groups. And then the other events they do all over Hollywood. And then so they were offered $25K to leave and they said no thanks.
And during this whole time throughout all the parties and the mess, since the house is still under the control of the court, the state has still been paying for the upkeep of the property. The listing agent asked the court to cut the utilities and ruin their fun, but guess what the court said? Quote, they said they couldn't because squatters have rights, end quotes. Or as the district attorney of LA puts it, you know, squatters have rights too. So what can we learn from this? It's that you should become a squatter. But in all seriousness, is that no matter how much things may suck, there is always a way out if you're creative enough. Obviously, you don't want to do anything as scummy as being a squatter, but this applies to everything, including YouTube. See, on YouTube, there are 2 types of people.
All right, that's it. The guy starts talking about how you make YouTube videos. But isn't that crazy? What this tells me is if you're a landlord or you want to invest in real estate, you had to do DIY property management. I have a landlord group. You're welcome to join. It's free. The links are everywhere. Or how awesome it is. Here, check this out.
For the first time in over 3 decades, the economy of the USA is growing faster than the economy of China, casting doubts over the assumption that eventually China will overtake the current global leader. This strong growth in what is already the largest and most diverse, more or less stagnant for more than a decade. But zoom in and get a closer look, and even within the USA, the story is much the same. A majority, almost 2/3 of US states, are not growing as fast as the USA itself. What this means is that just ahead of growth figures either, which is where we get to Florida. Florida is home to the 4th largest economy within the USA, having roughly the same economic output as Mexico, Indonesia, or Spain. Impressive considering it's just one of 50 states that make up the Union, but Florida has attracted the attention of a lot of economists for a reason other than just its sheer size. Florida is growing much faster that haven't typically been associated with the region's vibrant history. It's also gaining a lot of attention because that success may or may not be a net benefit to the USA as a whole, and to find out why, we must as always answer a few simple questions. What is driving Florida's rise by these growth areas? And finally, is this above average growth really sustainable? Once we have done all of that, we can put Florida, the 4th largest economy within the USA, on the Economics Explained leaderboard to see how it stacks up against other US states and entire national economies. For an economy to function well, it requires a lot of communication, but this starts to take up a lot of workers' time, and if their writing is misunderstood, it can slow down an entire organisation or cost a business a lot of money. That's why I make my whole team use the sponsor sign up using with something of a personal anecdote, which I promise is highly relevant to the economic situation of Florida. Back when I was at university doing my undergrad, I had a part-time job managing a shop where the regional boss pushed me and all of the other stores to make as many sales as possible. Of course, that's nothing unusual, but one day, for whatever reason, my particular shop was allowed to put on a big store-wide discount for everything for one day only. To make the most of this and to keep our big boss happy, we called all of our regular customers to let them know about this in advance so that we can make as much money as possible on the day. Unfortunately, I actually got into a lot of trouble for doing this because all that really happened was that people did all of the shopping they were going to do at a discount in our store instead of shopping like they normally would at all of the stores in the area, which made us look good at the expense of the company as a whole. Now, don't feel too bad, my PTSD from working retail is mostly past, but the point is, on a much larger scale, Florida might be doing the exact same thing and growing its economy at the expense of other states that make up the USA. The economy of the state as it exists today really got started as something of a tourist destination for people to travel to from colder regions on the east coast of the USA. While technically the region that went on to become the state was home to the first western city on the North American continent, it developed far slower than regions to the north, in large part because of its terrible geography. Even today, the state is full of swamps, mosquitoes, natural storms, and otherwise difficult to navigate terrain, so for most of its early history as its own state, it was just a place where people went on holidays, and even that was limited. This changed as railroads were built into the area, connecting its inland regions directly with major industrial and population centres in the north, which not only opened up the area to even more tourism, it started a significant portion of the state's total economic output, but they have been joined by a growing number of more, but one of the world's largest reserves of phosphorus, which is a naturally occurring chemical which is used primarily as a fertiliser. The USA has the third largest agricultural industry in the world, behind only China and India with their massive populations, and on a per capita basis, farming in the US is far more productive than it is almost anywhere else in the world. The phosphate dug out of the ground in Florida supplies 3/4 of all fertiliser required by farmers in the country, which beyond just being a great revenue centre for Florida, also means that the USA as a whole is a lot less dependent than most other countries on limited global supplies of this resource for their food security. Now, these are all very interesting, but it's not what has been driving the recent growth of the state, and those are more the industries causing controversy. Florida is a strange place, and part of its unique reputation comes down to the economic factors that attract people into the state from all walks of life. Florida has by far the highest level of net migration within the USA, and more people are moving to the state than even outliers like Texas, which has been making headlines in recent years for the wave of people moving there. Florida has gained almost as many new residents since 2020 as New York has lost, and unlike a lot of other states that have seen big increases in their number of new residents, this phenomenon isn't really anything new for Florida. Now, of course, a lot of that migration is just old people moving to the state to retire, which is why despite consistently high levels of internal migration into Florida, the population is still not growing as fast as a state like Texas, because, older residents die just as quickly as they move in. But the population is still growing overall, which compared to other major US economies like New York, which has been stagnant for more than a decade now, and California, which is going backwards, population growth of any form is a positive sign that there is something attracting more than just retirees to the state. A lot of Florida's new residents are young, highly skilled workers, and weirdly enough, both of these two groups are moving to the state for the same reasons. Taxes within the USA are charged on a national level as well as on a state level, which means that even within the same country, some people pay a higher rate than others because of where they live. Florida has no state income tax, which means people living in other states like New York and especially California can save a lot of money by moving there. For retirees, this is a good way to get their savings to stretch a little bit further, but recently it's attracted a lot of people in some of the state's newest booming industries. Low taxes, nice beaches, and a lower overall cost of living than centres like New York City, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles is great, but Florida wouldn't have been able to attract some of the US's most skilled and productive workers unless there were jobs for them to do there. Fortunately, the state has seen a significant increase in finance and technology companies setting up major centres of operation, if not moving their headquarters there entirely. The highest concentration of international banks in the USA is not in New York City, it's in Miami. And likewise, a lot of tech companies have set up shop in the state's biggest city because of its relative ease of doing business. Of course, there have been some high-profile cases of business interests in Florida going head-to-head with government power, and instances like this can genuinely have an impact on how desirable a region is to invest, work, or set up a business in, but overall, Florida is still perceived as being much less restrictive than other major centres like California and New York. A large part of the reason why average incomes in Florida have been increasing so rapidly over the last decade is not because the state itself has become more productive, it's because already productive and highly paid workers have been moving there either to work remotely or to follow the large companies that have also moved there. While this has been a huge positive trend for the state itself, it hasn't necessarily been good for the economy on a national scale. Now, we've covered the issue of capital flight and brain drain many times on this channel before, but we've never really explored it happening. Now, as always, we don't want to repeat too much here, but brain drain is what happens when the most skilled participants in an economic region move from one area to another for better opportunities, leaving the region they are moving from worse off overall, because it loses its best workers, taxpayers, and possibly has to face skill shortages. If a tech worker moved from Silicon Valley in California, not only would California miss out on their tax revenues, California-based companies may not be able to find the workers they need to continue their operations, and eventually they'll have to move to where they can find workers. Now, a quick side note is that a reasonable assumption would be that the rise of remote work could combat this, now that there's no city or country offer them the best tax deal and living conditions. Without that, there is less standing in their way, especially if the receiving economy is happy to house them, which most normally are to wealthy and productive workers. It's probably not the most consequential example, but there's a reason why so many people with online businesses move to Dubai, and it's not because they're a fan of the architecture. Capital flight is similar to brain drain, but they are two distinct problems. Capital flight occurs when people pull their capital out of one area, labour, and can be used to increase economic output. So tools, infrastructure, technology, materials, and of course, regular old cash. If people move, they tend to bring their stuff with them, including their spending money, which denies capital from where they're moving from and provides it to where they're moving to. This has been a major problem for a lot of national economies in modern history as moving internationally has become more common. Extreme examples like China and South Africa have even imposed restrictions on how much capital their people are allowed to take with them if they leave the country, because the exodus of wealthy citizens could otherwise have serious impacts on the economy. Now, within a sovereign nation like the USA, a country which famously values its freedoms, such restrictions wouldn't be possible, and this is why in certain ways, capital flight and brain drain can cause even more serious issues. At this point, it's probably important to recognise that while a lot of people are moving to Florida from places like New York, California, and Illinois, in the past, dozens of other states across the USA had the same problem with skilled workers moving into the very same states that are now losing workers to Florida. The USA itself is globally the greatest beneficiary of skilled migration and foreign capital movements, so there is a level of irony to states like Florida and Texas now causing the system at their part-time job. If every state within the USA starts competing with one another to attract the most talented workers and most valuable industries, then it's just going to end up as a race to the bottom on regulations, tax revenues, and incentives. In a way, this is already happening, with cities fighting with one another to get companies to set up new headquarters in their metro area. Short term, this could be a boost to regional economic centres, but it will almost be. Businesses, policymakers, and even economists love to hate them, but there are usually reasons why certain policies exist. What's more is that competition between supposedly united states can cause something of a feedback loop, where poorer states fall further behind richer states because talented workers move to areas where they can make more money and be surrounded by the lifestyle that wealthy people enjoy, and in doing so, they prop up the wealthy state at the expense of the poorer state. The wider that gap gets, the more pressure it will put on highly productive people from poorer states to move to the richer ones. Extreme regional inequality will need to either be addressed with cumbersome and realistically political. Now, the USA is a long way from anything that extreme for now, but it's something that shouldn't be completely ignored as its labour force and industrial centres become increasingly mobile. A problem this is causing right now, though, is that regular people who already live in states like Florida are finding it harder to keep up financially with the wealthy people moving in to enjoy the lower taxes, nicer weather, and comparatively cheaper living expenses. Governments at all levels should do what is best for the people they represent, and achieving economic growth and increasing incomes is a major part of delivering those outcomes. But when headline figures like this are achieved in ways that don't really improve living standards for anyone, apart from perhaps a select group of wealthy internal migrants, headline economic success doesn't always equate. Starting as always with size, Florida has a GDP of roughly $1.4 trillion US. The small disclaimer here is that just like every other state within the USA, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, the sources that we usually rely on for macroeconomic figures, do not produce data for states within a sovereign country, so the numbers here don't use exactly the same methodology. Even still, Florida's economic output is roughly equivalent to Mexico's, and if it was its own independent country, it would be the 14th largest in the world, so it gets an 8 out of 10. GDP per capita is $70,557, which is very good by global standards, and it's only improving. But despite all of its recent success, this number, which has a per capita output of $82,885, although that number is pulled up by just 17 out of the 50 total states and DC. Even still, this leaderboard ranks economies internationally, where it would get another 8 out of 10. Stability and confidence is quite strong. It's a major state in the world's largest economy, it uses the world's reserve currency, and despite the occasional political maneuver that makes headlines, the state is incredibly stable, which is in large part why so many major industries have been attracted there. It gets a 9 out of 10, only losing a point because of the internal challenges the state is facing, and ongoing geographic issues like tropical storms, which can have a very tangible impact on the economy's future. Growth has been one of the strongest within the USA, which has itself been one of the fastest growing major economies in the world over the past decade. The economy has roughly doubled in size in the last 10 years, giving it a 9 out of 10 in this metric, even if that growth has come at the expense of other areas of the economy. Finally, industry. Florida, even for such a large economy, has a well-diversified economic base of agriculture, mining, tourism, and now financial services and technology. This is to say nothing of industries like construction, which are fantastic employers and have been booming thanks to new people moving into the state. Overall, the economy gets an 8 out of 10, again only losing 2 points because a lot of these industries still rely on the USA as a whole to feed them, rather than creating independent homegrown industrial bases. Overall, that gives the economy of Florida an 8.4 out of 10, which is exactly the same as the state of Texas, which despite having many of the same demographic characteristics as Florida, arrives at this particular score in a different and arguably more sustainable way. You should be able to click to that video on your...
Alright, well, Florida's awesome. I don't know what happened. The stream just cut out. I reopened it, tried to reconnect. I hope it's working. But for the last 22 days, I did 22 pull-ups. Let me see if I can show. Is it 5? Yeah. You can see the pull-up bar. And it's still before midnight. So if I can do, I think, another 22 today, today's day 23, that'll be 500 pull-ups in the last 23 days. I did it for my buddy Smitty, who commits suicide on the 7th of April. I'm going to edit the video and post it on his anniversary. It's been 7 years since he did that, and just in remembrance of him. The last like 3 or 4 days, I hung American flags there, and then I was wearing my blouses. I didn't have like my whole set, but I was like 2 striped, then 3 striped, and 4 striped, and then I even went all out and I put my blues on. So I think that concludes today. Let's see how many pull-ups I can do. Did it.